Hey everyone, good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronnice McLaughlin. It's Resistance Live for the 16th of August, 2019. And we're here and we have sorted out our Patreon. I'm very excited about that. So in any event, it's good to see you all. It's as always, Friday in Trumpland. Couple quick things while we've got people logging in here and the like that I will just mention very briefly. Haven, as you all know, is our 28-day program of respite and relief for activists and leaders that starts on the 3rd of September. It is open for registration now. There are scholarships available. There's also a scholarship donation form. And you can head on over to GaiaLeadershipProject.com/Haven to learn more about that. And we've already got a whole big bunch of people signed up for that, which is awesome. We did have a question from someone about, can you participate in Haven if you don't have any social media accounts? And the answer to that is yes. Because the way in which we're going to be announcing the daily themes for Haven will be over email, in addition to inside an optional Facebook group. And we were asked, why is it that some people, for instance, may not be, wanting to be on Facebook? Why would we be hosting it there as a result of that? And the answer to that is that, honestly, in the short window of time that we pulled this program together, because we saw such a serious need for it, we researched a couple of other social media platforms where there might potentially be a hosting opportunity, and none of them really are as amenable to this right now as Facebook is. So, this will be a limited group. You do not have to participate in Facebook to participate in Haven, but it's there if you want to. And so for those of you who are concerned, just know that you can be a part of the Haven experience just simply by having an email account. But the Facebook group is there for you as well if you want to be a part of the community experience of it. Okay. So one other thing to mention on Haven: scholarship period closes at 7 p.m. Pacific this coming Wednesday. So please make sure that if you are interested in applying for a scholarship, you've got it done by then. But it's really important that if you are wanting to get into this, that you understand that it starts on the 3rd of September and you get yourself registered as soon as you can. So GaiaLeadershipProject.com/Haven. Also going to mention our new weekly free podcast, which is going to be kind of like a discussion of the top 5 topics of the week, is going to drop today on the old Resistance Live podcast stream. So for those of you who have listened on iTunes, or you've listened on Stitcher, or you listened on Spotify, you will be able to find the weekly summary podcast on the same stream there. So we will also, by the way, for those of you who are with us on Patreon, be posting the link to the free weekly summary podcast there on Patreon as well. So we're all good. Okay. All right. So we have a few topics to cover for today. I was asked to comment on the events at the Wyatt Detention Facility in Rhode Island earlier in the week. Now, I had mentioned this on Twitter and have kind of talked about this a little bit elsewhere in terms of the things that are happening right now from the standpoint of the detention facilities. The event at Wyatt, which was a Never Again Action event, again, Jews for Justice, blocking the entrance to the Wyatt Detention Facility in Rhode Island. A couple of nights ago, an ICE truck, an ICE van, intentionally ran through a line of protesters. There were 2 people who were very seriously injured, others who had minor injuries as a result of that. The ICE truck, it turns out, was driven by a captain in ICE who intentionally ran his van into the protesters. That man has now been put on suspension. It is, of course, a tragic series of events, not to mention a sign of where we find ourselves. And again, it's something that I have drawn attention to as those events have developed. But, one thing I just want to point out to all of you here is that there should be nothing surprising about this. If you have been following along with the culture inside ICE and inside CBP right now, with regard to what is happening in the detention facilities. I don't think anybody is under any illusion that ICE and CBP are currently populated by an awful lot of people who have alt-right or white supremacist leanings. We know that something like 50% of CBP was in that horrific Facebook group that was revealed in news reporting over the last couple of months, including, by the way, the chief of Customs and Border Protection. So CBP, of course, is an affiliated organization to ICE. They're not in the line of command with one another, but ICE is in the same boat. We've seen horrific actions by officers inside ICE. And so again, My comment on it is basically like, you all should be aware that it happened. You all should be aware that the captain has been suspended. And the question now is going to be, is there going to be any criminal prosecution or a related penalty for this particular human being, which there should be going forward. But, want to let you all know that that is happening out there. And it is something, obviously we should all be aware of and concerned about. Okay. All right. We had a question about executive privilege. So as many of you may have learned already, Corey Lewandowski has been subpoenaed by the House to testify. In addition to the fact that the president has endorsed a senatorial bid by Lewandowski, potentially in New Hampshire, which in and of itself is illegal. I mean, I just have to say that, like, he's interfering already. And there are indications that in and of itself could be witness tampering, because an endorsement from the president of the United States for someone who's potentially a witness against him would arguably fall within, there's a case to be made that it's witness tampering. All that said, there are indications that, the White House is going to say to Lewandowski, executive privilege applies to you. So the question that we had about this was, can executive privilege apply to someone who never worked in the White House? The answer to that is no. And this is one of the things that, if those of you who have been watching the broadcast for a very long time are aware that executive privilege has very strict limitations in the precedential case law out there of how it can be applied. It cannot be applied to anything that happened before the president took office. It cannot be applied to anything that doesn't fall within the realm of advising the president and conversations with the president about executive action. So one of the things to be aware of here, of course, which I think you all already know because you've been watching for a while, one of the things you should already be aware of is that attempts to extend executive privilege will be challenged in the courts. And they already have been, actually, from the standpoint of the Mazars opinion that we saw earlier in the summer, from the standpoint of the Deutsche Bank subpoena that we already saw earlier in the summer. You cannot extend executive privilege to things that don't have to do with the executive. And Corey Lewandowski never worked in the White House. He has not worked for this administration. So him being called to testify about events leading up to the election, him being called to testify about events during the transition, is not subject to executive privilege. So this is one, again, that will likely be tested in the courts if it is asserted by Lewandowski as a basis for him not to testify. Okay, all I'm going to say is this: the president has raised a flag about potentially buying Greenland. Greenland's not for sale. So I'm just going to put it out there as another sign of like the insanity. Okay. We had a question about Elizabeth Warren. So there's a running joke circulating on Twitter right now that you should all be aware of. But I will tell you the joke after I tell you about the articles that have been surfacing in the New York Times. So there have been articles, by the way, for those of you who didn't pay attention yesterday, Warren is now leading in the polls in Iowa by a lot, like not by a little, by a lot. And it, like, is ahead of everyone else, including Biden and Sanders. I am not surprised by this. You all know that I am a huge fan of Elizabeth Warren. There is nothing about this particular state of affairs that shocks me. I will add, however, that the same kind of gendered news reporting that we saw about Hillary in 2016 has already started to happen with regard to Elizabeth Warren. So the New York Times did a profile that said something like, Warren is surging among Democrats, but they're also concerned. And the running joke that's running around on Twitter right now is Elizabeth Warren is going to be the next president of the United States. And the day after her inauguration, there's going to be an article about whether or not she's electable in the New York Times. Please know that when you see something that is like framed as electability or framed as Democrats having concerns, when she is already ahead in the polls, when the indications are that she is charging ahead of the rest of the field, you should be very wary of that from a misogyny perspective, because the chances are very good that what is happening there is some form of unconscious bias in the reporting. To me, I am very, very cautious about the reporting that has happened so far on this particular issue about Warren's leading in the polls and whether or not she's electable. I think it is dangerous. I think it needs to be called out for what it is, because what it does, all that it does, by the way, like this is the problem with unconscious bias. All that it does is raise concerns in the minds of people who are reading the article. I don't have any concerns about Warren's electability. Nobody I know who's endorsed her already has any concerns about her electability. It doesn't appear that anybody in Iowa has any concerns about her electability, right? I think the bigger concern here has to do with the reporting of entities like the New York Times who are not operating with consciousness about the biases in their reporters. So I am not worried about this particular issue from any standpoint other than the way in which an article like that can influence the electorate. And that is one reason why we need to keep shouting it out, just shouting it out as much as we possibly can. All right. One other thing that I just wanted to mention for today. I have been engaged in a couple of phone calls over the last couple of days on detention facilities and new detention facilities that are being built. And I want you all to be aware that there's ongoing effort right now by ICE and CBP to create new detention facilities. This is no surprise to anybody who's been watching this broadcast, to create new detention facilities to hold more people in detention camps. There are indications that a brand new tent city has been erected not far from Tornillo, which was shut down, as you all may remember. I mentioned yesterday on the broadcast that Homestead is going to be reopened. There's big question marks there about how many kids are going to end up in Homestead and whether or not they're going to be new detained, separated kids or not. And I'll also just add that, here in Southern California, there have been indications that there are contracts being signed on brand new facilities to be built here between Los Angeles and the border. So there's a lot here at this moment in time to not lose sight of. And one of the things that concerns me is that, we all are in a state right now of overwhelm. We all are all right now in a state of at least, and I will just say this, you all know, because I've been talking about this week. Every activist I'm talking to right now, every serious commentator who's got a major platform is in a place right now of feeling completely overwhelmed. So the thing that I don't want to have happen here, and this is one of the reasons why I've just been recommending all week that people engage in really conscious forms of deciding to disengage, stepping back. This is one of the reasons why we decided to design Haven in the way that it is constructed. We need to find ways of finding relief so that we don't look away, right? Which, as you all know, has been a whole thing for this summer. We can't look away from what this administration is doing, but we also have to find ways of surviving and continuing to be grounded and taking care of ourselves so that we can continue to fight back. So the thing that I just want to say about this with regard to the issue of the detention facilities is that it is incredibly important that we continue to amplify that the government is not stopping, that in fact they are ramping up quite significantly their efforts right now to create new camps. And the further that this goes on, the longer that it goes on, the more concern we have to have about the length of time that people are going to be detained and the long-term strategy of Stephen Miller and this administration with regard to holding people in camps. So there's a lot more to be said about that. There are a lot of new issues that are going to come to the fore on this front from activism and organizing standpoints in the coming weeks. In the interim, I just want to encourage all of you to please pay attention. And this relates to the first topic on the broadcast today, to please pay attention to Never Again Action and Jews for Justice and what they are doing all over the country. And please make sure as well that, from the standpoint of activating that, we all have to kind of cycle in and out, right? It's important. Nobody can be the front of the line 100% of the time. And we need to make sure that, in our organizing locally, and I just want to shout this out, by the way, I've heard from a lot of you in the last 24 hours who are continuing to activate on this issue and other issues in your local communities, which is amazing. keep it up. Good work. Please also remember that standing at the front of the line is usually the place where you get beat up the most, meaning you are the subject of attack. I talked to 2 women in the last 24 hours who have had horrendous things happen to them in their activism in terms of being attacked locally or even on a statewide basis in the last 24 hours. It's really tough. All of us need to cycle in and out and be very mindful of the long haul activism that's going to be required here, as well as the importance of taking care of ourselves. So with that, I just want to make one recommendation for all of you that I am starting to try to implement right now on the weekends, which is that we all know that there's a little bit of a declination usually in the crazy news cycle over the weekend. I am really trying right now to take at least 12 to 24 hours off of social media every weekend, with the understanding, of course, that if something huge breaks, it's probably going to hit on a news alert on my phone. I will tell you all that I feel like that is incredibly important right now to our sanity. The one other thing I just want to mention here is that a number of other significant commentators on Twitter have been talking about the fact that the constant exposure on Twitter right now is having an impact on all of us in terms of our brain chemistry and our physicality. And I've mentioned this in different ways across, the last couple of days. There is a growing conversation about the adverse impact for those of us who are really on there all the time in terms of how it's impacting us in real life, right? The fact that it's having an adverse impact on our relationships. For some of us, it's actually making us like physically ill. For others of us, it's affecting our brain chemistry in ways that are making us depressed or more anxious. Your ability to consciously disengage and to allow your central nervous system to kind of like just drop, even if it's just for a few hours, is incredibly important to where we find ourselves right now. And, this is informed, again, by the conversations I've talked about this week with regard to the way in which authoritarian regimes function to make people disengage. We have to think about it from the standpoint of drawing back consciously so that we don't shut down, and also so that we're not in fight or flight response all the time, so that we can then return with more energy, and so that we are maintaining our relationships in ways that are healthier. Okay. So I want to recommend that you all try to do that for at least some chunk of time this weekend. And I'll mention again the weekly new free podcast, which is kind of a summary of the top 5 major events of the week, based on all of your questions. So for those of you who are watching on Patreon, it will be a little bit of a rehash. I'm just going to warn you of 5 main events that will be available today. And I will also just add that please remember that if you want to apply for a scholarship for Haven, you need to get it in by Wednesday at 7 p.m. Haven starts, key here, on the 3rd of September. So if you want to get in, please go to GaiaLeadershipProject.com/Haven. I also just want to mention we've had a number of people donate scholarships in the last 24 hours for others. Much love to you. Thank you for doing that. It's one of the things that kind of makes me super happy about this community is the generosity within it. And yeah, everybody, please take some conscious time off this weekend. To me, it just feels like that has to be an ongoing strategy, to take just like 12, 24, even just 4 hours off of social media and do something in real time with real people. Okay. All right. Much love to all of you. Thank you all for your patience as we have kind of gotten accommodated to Patreon here. I will mention one other thing just about Patreon itself. I know we are hearing from some of you that there's a glitch where you cannot comment on Patreon while you were watching the video. We are in touch with Patreon and trying to figure out how to strategize around that. So please be aware that we're working on that. As soon as we have a solution to it, we will let you all know. Please also know this, that there is still this issue of not getting notifications on Patreon if you have not opted into a specific tier. So please, if you are not getting notifications about the broadcast when it goes live on Patreon, log into your account and make sure that you are registered at a particular tier on Patreon. It has to be like, a $2, $5, $10 tier, because the notifications go out to tiers, not to everybody who's a patron if you are not particularly subscribed to a tier. All right. Much love to all of you. By the way, there's a bonus video coming today for those of you on Patreon at $10 and up. Mwah! I'll talk to all of you on Monday. All right. Bye. Okay.